The moment Sarah walked out of that law office, I knew she thought she'd won everything. Her smirk told me she believed she'd outsmarted me, manipulated our dying grandmother, and secured a fortune that was never meant to be hers alone. What she didn't know was that Grandma Rose had been 3 steps ahead of both of us the entire time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the betrayal ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. 6 months earlier, Grandma Rose had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave her 3 months, maybe 4 if she was lucky. She was 87 years old, sharp as a tack, and had built a small empire from nothing. Rose's boutique had started as a single dress shop in downtown Chicago in 1962, and by the time she was ready to step back, she owned 17 locations across 3 states. The woman was worth close to $12 million. Sarah and I had always known we'd inherit something, but we'd never talked specifics. Grandma Rose was private about her finances, and, honestly, both of us were more focused on spending time with her during those final months than worrying about money. At least, I thought we both were. I should have seen the warning signs. Sarah started visiting Grandma Rose every single day after the diagnosis. She'd always been the more distant grandchild, choosing college in California and building her marketing career there, coming home maybe twice a year for holidays. Suddenly, she was driving the 2 hours from the city to Grandma's house in Millbrook every afternoon after work. She told me she wanted to make up for lost time. She said she felt guilty about not being closer to Grandma over the years. I believed her. I thought it was beautiful that Sarah was finally connecting with the woman who had helped raise us after our parents died in that car accident when I was 12 and Sarah was 15. Grandma Rose had taken us in without hesitation. She'd moved us into her sprawling Victorian house, enrolled us in good schools, and made sure we never felt like burdens. She'd been tough but fair, demanding excellence but offering unconditional love. When I decided to stay in Millbrook after high school to help run the boutiques, she'd been proud. When Sarah left for California, Grandma had supported that too. The first red flag came in week 3 of Sarah's daily visits. I'd stopped by Grandma's house after work to find Sarah in the kitchen with a stack of papers spread across the dining table, legal documents. When she saw me, she quickly shuffled them together and slipped them into a folder. "Just helping Grandma organize some old paperwork," she said, but her voice had that tight quality it got when she was lying. Grandma Rose walked into the kitchen with tea, moving slowly but still radiating that quiet strength she'd always had. "Your sister's been such a help getting my affairs in order," she said. But something in her eyes didn't match her words. I let it go. I trusted Sarah. More than that, I trusted Grandma Rose. The second red flag was harder to ignore. 3 weeks later, I arrived at Grandma's house to find her agitated in a way I'd never seen before. She was pacing the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly. "She wants me to change everything," Grandma said when she saw me. "Sarah thinks the will isn't fair." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She says you've had advantages I never gave her, that you got to work in the business, learn the operations, build relationships with customers and suppliers. She says the inheritance should reflect that imbalance." I stared at my grandmother. But staying here was my choice. Sarah wanted to leave. She wanted to build her own life. "I know that. You know that. But Sarah." Grandma Rose sat heavily in her favorite kitchen chair. "She's making some compelling arguments about fairness and equal treatment." That night, I called Sarah. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About what you're doing to Grandma. About the pressure you're putting on her to change her will." Silence stretched across the phone line. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. "I'm not pressuring anyone. I'm simply making sure she understands all perspectives before making irreversible decisions. Sarah, she's dying. She doesn't need the stress of family drama over money. This isn't about money. This is about justice. You've been the golden child for 15 years. You got to stay close to her, work in her business, be part of her daily life. I had to build my own life from scratch in California. When she dies, you'll get everything just because you stayed home." The accusation hit like a physical blow. I stayed home to take care of her, to help with the business, because that's what family does. And I left to build my own career so I wouldn't be dependent on her. that shouldn't be punished. We hung up angry. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Sarah continued her daily visits to Grandma Rose. And during those visits, something changed. Grandma became quieter, more withdrawn. The light in her eyes dimmed, and it wasn't just the cancer. I found out later that Sarah had presented Grandma with research about family inheritance disputes, cases where children who stayed home to help elderly parents received disproportionate shares of estates. Articles about how geographic distance shouldn't determine love or deserve. Stories of families torn apart by unequal wills. Sarah had always been persuasive. It's what made her successful in marketing. She could find the emotional core of any argument and present it in a way that felt both logical and sympathetic. She was using those skills on our dying grandmother. The third red flag came in the form of a phone call from Grandma's lawyer. "Your grandmother wants to update her will, Mr. Peterson said. She's asked me to draft new documents. I wanted to let you know as a courtesy, since you're currently listed as the primary beneficiary and executor." My mouth went dry. What kind of changes? I can't discuss specifics, but she's looking at a more equal distribution of assets. She's also considering changing the executor designation. That evening, I drove to Grandma's house. Sarah's car was in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see them sitting at the table, more legal documents spread between them. Sarah was pointing to specific paragraphs, speaking intently. Grandma looked tired and confused. I walked in without knocking. "We need to have a family meeting," I announced. "All 3 of us. Right now." What followed was the most painful conversation of my life. Sarah laid out her case with the skill of a professional presenter. She talked about fairness and equality. She pointed out that I'd had 15 years of financial stability working in Grandma's business, while she'd struggled to build her career from nothing. She argued that proximity shouldn't determine love, and that a will should reflect equal treatment of grandchildren. She was convincing. Even I could see the logic in her arguments. But what she was really doing was rewriting history, painting my decision to stay and help as opportunistic rather than loving, framing my close relationship with Grandma as manipulation rather than genuine connection, turning my presence during Grandma's daily struggles into evidence of scheming rather than care. Grandma Rose listened to everything Sarah said. Then she looked at me with those wise eyes that had guided me through so many difficult moments. "Is this how you feel too, that the original will was unfair?" The question broke my heart because I could hear the doubt in her voice. Sarah had planted seeds of uncertainty about her own judgment, about my motives, about everything she'd planned for her legacy. "Grandma, I trust your judgment completely. I always have. Whatever you decide is right with me." And I meant it. But my heart was breaking because I could see that Sarah's campaign was working. 2 weeks later, Grandma Rose signed a new will. Equal distribution of assets, Sarah named as executor. I learned about it when Mr. Peterson called to inform me of the changes. By that point, Grandma was in hospice care, too weak for complex conversations. Sarah had achieved what she'd set out to do. Grandma Rose died on a rainy Thursday morning in October. I was holding her hand. Sarah was on a flight back from a business trip in Seattle. She'd gambled that Grandma would hang on for a few more days, and she'd lost that bet. The funeral was beautiful. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Customers from all 17 boutiques, employees she'd mentored over decades, community leaders she'd supported through charity work. Grandma Rose had touched so many lives. Sarah delivered a eulogy about love transcending distance, about how Grandma had supported her dreams even when she'd chosen to live far away. She spoke beautifully about second chances and the importance of making peace before it's too late. I wanted to vomit. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 5 days to prepare myself for watching Sarah inherit control of everything Grandma Rose had built. But those 5 days gave me time to think, and the more I thought about Sarah's behavior over those final months, the more questions I had. Why had she been so secretive about those early meetings with Grandma? Why had she researched inheritance law before even talking to Grandma about her concerns? Why had she waited until Grandma was at her most vulnerable to launch her campaign? Most importantly, why had Grandma seemed so conflicted about the changes? In 45 years of knowing her, I'd never seen Grandma Rose doubt her own decisions the way she doubted that new will. The morning of the will reading, I sat in my car outside Mr. Peterson's office, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. Sarah had already arrived. Through the window, I could see her sitting in the conference room, confident and composed. She'd won, she knew it, I knew it. But when I walked into that conference room and saw the expression on Mr. Peterson's face, I realized something else was about to happen. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to explain an unusual situation. Mrs. Rose came to see me 3 days before she passed away. She was concerned about some changes that had been made to her estate plan, and she wanted to make one final modification." Sarah's face went white. "She established what's called a testamentary trust, with specific instructions that were to remain sealed until today. The trust supersedes the will that was executed 6 weeks ago." My heart started pounding. Mr. Peterson opened a sealed envelope and removed 3 documents. Mrs. Rose was very specific about how she wanted this handled. She wanted both of you to understand exactly why she made these decisions. He began reading from what was clearly Grandma's own handwriting. "To my beloved granddaughters, I have watched both of you during these final months, and I have learned things about each of you that have surprised me. Sarah, your arguments about fairness in inheritance were intelligent and persuasive. You researched the law, you presented compelling cases, and you convinced me to change my original plan." Sarah relaxed slightly. She thought this was vindication. "But in the process of making those arguments, you revealed something about yourself that deeply troubled me. You approached my death as a business opportunity. You researched inheritance law before discussing your concerns with me directly. You waited until I was weakest to present your case. Most importantly, you treated my legacy as a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be honored." The color drained from Sarah's face completely. "Alex, your willingness to accept whatever I decided showed me that you understood something Sarah did not. This inheritance was never about what either of you deserved. It was about what I wanted to give. It was about continuing the work I started and the values I tried to teach you both." Mr. Peterson looked up from the letter. "Mrs. Rose has designated Alex as the sole beneficiary of the trust, which contains the entirety of her estate. Alex is also named as executor, with full discretionary power over all assets." The silence in the room was deafening. But Mr. Peterson wasn't finished. However, Mrs. Rose left specific instructions for Alex regarding her sister. He handed me a second letter, sealed with my name on it. With shaking hands, I opened it and read Grandma's final words to me. "Alex, I am giving you everything, not because you stayed home, but because you understood that family wealth is a responsibility, not a prize." Sarah's focus on what was fair revealed that she saw my money as something owed to her rather than something earned through love and service. My eyes filled with tears, but I kept reading. "However, I do not want my death to destroy your relationship with your sister. I am trusting you to make decisions about Sarah's inheritance that reflect both justice and mercy. The power is yours, but I hope you will use it wisely." I looked up at Sarah. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. For the first time in months, I held all the power. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "There's one more thing." Mrs. Rose included a separate document that she wanted read aloud to both of you. He unfolded a third piece of paper. "Sarah and Alex, I hope that someday you will both understand that the greatest inheritance I could leave you was not money, but the knowledge that family loyalty cannot be negotiated. Sarah, you spent 3 months trying to convince me that love should be measured in dollars. Alex, you spent those same 3 months simply loving me. The difference between those approaches is the difference between entitlement and gratitude. I pray that both of you will learn from this experience and find your way back to each other." When Mr. Peterson finished reading, the room fell into complete silence. Sarah was staring at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. I was trying to process the weight of what had just happened. I owned everything: the boutiques, the house, the investments, the bank accounts, all of it. But more than that, I owned the responsibility of deciding what to do about Sarah. She finally looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized. It was the same expression she'd had when she was 15 and our parents had just died. Lost, scared, desperately trying to figure out how to survive in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. "Alex," she whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 words that carried the weight of 6 months of manipulation and betrayal. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't undo what you did to her in those final months." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "I was scared. She was dying, and I knew you'd been closer to her all these years, and I panicked. I thought if I didn't advocate for myself, I'd end up with nothing. So you decided to advocate against me instead." "Yes, and it was wrong. It was horrible. I turned her final months into a legal battle instead of just loving her." I could see that she meant it, but I could also see that she still didn't fully understand what she'd done. She was focused on the inheritance she'd lost, not the peace of mind she'd stolen from a dying woman. "Sarah, do you understand why she changed everything back?" She nodded slowly. "Because I treated her money like a business negotiation instead of a gift." "But do you understand why that hurt her so much?" Sarah thought for a long moment. "Because it meant I saw her as an obstacle to overcome rather than a grandmother to love." Finally, she was starting to get it. I stood up and walked to the window of the conference room. Outside, life was continuing as normal, people walking to work, traffic moving through downtown. The world hadn't stopped because my family had just imploded. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. For the past 6 months, I've watched you manipulate and pressure and scheme your way toward an inheritance you thought you deserved. You researched legal strategies to convince a dying woman to change her mind about her own money. You waited until she was at her weakest to make your case. You turned her generosity into evidence of unfairness." I turned back to face her. "But the worst part wasn't what you did to me or even what you did to the inheritance. The worst part was what you did to her. You spent her final months making her doubt her own judgment. You planted seeds of guilt and uncertainty in a woman who was already facing death. You stole her peace of mind when she needed it most." Sarah was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "That's what Grandma Rose couldn't forgive. Not the fact that you wanted equal inheritance, but the way you went about getting it, the lack of respect for her autonomy. The manipulation during her most vulnerable time." I sat back down across from her. "But here's what I need you to know. Despite everything you did, Grandma Rose still loved you. That's why she gave me the power to make decisions about your inheritance. She didn't want you completely cut off. She wanted you to learn from this." Sarah looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What are you going to do?" I'd been thinking about that question for the past 20 minutes. I held the power to give Sarah nothing, to give her everything, or to find some middle ground that honored both justice and mercy. "I'm going to honor what Grandma Rose really wanted," I said. "Not the will you convinced her to sign, and not even the trust she created in response. I'm going to honor the values she tried to teach us both." I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. "You're going to receive an inheritance, Sarah, a significant one. But it's going to come with conditions that ensure you understand what this money represents." Her face showed a flicker of hope mixed with wariness. "First, you're going to write a letter to every employee at every boutique explaining what you did during Grandma's final months and how you plan to honor her memory going forward. Second, you're going to volunteer at hospice care facilities for the next 2 years, learning what it really means to support people who are facing death. Third, you're going to establish a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs who want to start their own businesses instead of inheriting existing ones." Sarah nodded slowly as I continued writing. "In exchange, you'll receive a trust fund that provides you with a comfortable income for life, plus a lump sum sufficient to buy a house and establish financial security. But the principal remains in trust for your children, and if you ever try to manipulate or pressure any family member about money again, you forfeit everything." I handed her the paper. "These are my terms. Take them or leave them." She read through the conditions twice before looking up at me. "This is more than fair, it's generous." "It's not about fairness or generosity. It's about second chances and learning from mistakes." Sarah folded the paper and put it in her purse. "I'll do everything you've asked, all of it." I believe you will. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. Mr. Peterson had left the room to give us privacy, understanding that this conversation went far deeper than legal formalities. Finally, Sarah spoke again. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Not just for what I did to you, but for what I did to her? The question hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that Sarah would manipulate our dying grandmother for money, I would have said it was impossible. She was my sister. We'd survived losing our parents together. We'd built adult lives that respected each other's choices. I'd trusted her completely. But people can surprise you. Sometimes in wonderful ways, sometimes in devastating ways. Sarah had chosen to let fear and greed override love and respect during the most important months of our grandmother's life. I don't know, I answered honestly. Forgiveness isn't something you can schedule or force, but I hope so, for both our sakes. She nodded, understanding that this was the best I could offer right now. What happens next? She asked. Next, you go home and start figuring out how to be the person Grandma Rose always believed you could be. You write those letters. You sign up for hospice volunteer training. You establish that scholarship fund. You prove that her faith in second chances wasn't misplaced. And you? I thought about the weight of inheriting not just money and businesses, but the responsibility of continuing something meaningful. Grandma Rose had spent 60 years building something that mattered, employing people, serving customers, contributing to communities, supporting causes she believed in. Now, that was all mine to steward. I'm going to try to be worthy of the trust she placed in me. I'm going to run those boutiques the way she would have wanted. I'm going to take care of the employees who became like family to her. I'm going to make sure her legacy means something more than just money passing from one generation to the next. Sarah stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Alex? Yeah? She was proud of you. In those final weeks, even when she was questioning everything else, she never questioned her pride in you. I thought you should know that. After she left, I sat alone in that conference room for another hour, trying to process everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been focused on helping my grandmother die with dignity and peace. I'd had no idea that my sister was mounting a campaign to rewrite our family's legacy. But Grandma Rose had known. Maybe not the specific details, but she'd understood that Sarah's approach revealed something troubling about her character. She decided to teach both of us a final lesson about family, loyalty, and the difference between earning something and feeling entitled to it. The inheritance I'd received came with enormous responsibility, not just financial, but moral. I was now the steward of everything Grandma Rose had built, the guardian of her values, the protector of her legacy. But I was also responsible for Sarah's future, the power to determine her financial security, to set conditions for her redemption, to decide whether our relationship could be rebuilt. Grandma Rose had given me that power not because she trusted my judgment more than Sarah's, but because she believed I understood that power should be used not for personal gain, but for the greater good. As I finally left that conference room, I realized that the real inheritance wasn't the money or the businesses. It was the opportunity to prove that I'd learned the most important lesson Grandma Rose had tried to teach us both. That family wealth is a responsibility, not a prize. That love cannot be negotiated or manipulated. That true inheritance lies not in what we receive, but in what we choose to give. Sarah had spent 3 months trying to convince Grandma Rose that fairness could be measured in dollars. I had the rest of my life to prove that love could be measured in choices. And everything I chose from this moment forward would either honor or betray the faith of the woman who had saved Sarah and me when our world fell apart, who had raised us with wisdom and strength, and who had trusted me with the most difficult decision any family member could face. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any amount of money could ever be. But I was ready to carry it.